Hi, really excited about sharing with you a new study that we've been involved in over the last year. It's the book of Revelation. And I want to share with you over the next 13 lessons some material that we believe is vital in terms of understanding the book of Revelation, but also vital in terms of its truth for our life walking with Christ. So this lesson here, we really want to focus in on the first three verses. But specifically in those first three verses, we really want to look at this opening statement that John gives us. Before we do so, kind of want to give you a working knowledge of the book of Revelation, kind of a breakdown of the book in its most basic form. There are, of course, many different divisions and sections in the book of Revelation, but when you break down the book of Revelation in its most basic content, what you're going to have is there's two main sections to the book of Revelation. The first main section is, if you have your Bibles open, and I trust you have your Bibles open, is the first three verses of chapter 1. That's the first main section. The second main section, or the other section in the book, begins at verse 4 of chapter 1 and extends down through the end of the book. Now, of course, you're probably thinking, hey, that's real basic, but it is real basic. And this is the natural, most basic division in the book, because the first three verses are not actually a part of the prophecy itself. It's the prologue. In fact, if you have the New International Version, what you're going to find is right above the first verse, you're going to have this word in italics, prologue. Prologue. That's a Greek term made up of two different Greek words. The Greek word pro and the Greek word logos. The Greek word pro means before, and the Greek word logos means word. You put those two words together, before and logos, word, what you have is these three verses, as John is describing them, are the words before the actual book itself. Now, this is really typical if you've been involved at any level in John's writings. He's written 5 letters or books in the New Testament. 3 out of those 5 have prologues, have these words before the book. And John gives us these prologues to set parameters or boundaries on the book in which we're about to embark upon. So if you're in John, the first 18 verses, that's the prologue, those are the words before the actual book, which gives us a focusing, it gives us parameters or boundaries by which we're able to receive the book. So these first 3 verses are really crucial because they set the tone of the book, they set the boundaries of the book, they set the parameters of the book. So if you get into the book of Revelation, and you get in the book of Revelation and read into the book of Revelation anything that's outside of these first 3 verses, outside of the boundaries or parameters, you're misunderstanding the book of Revelation. So these first 3 verses are really crucial. He begins this first opening statement with a crucial aspect to the book of Revelation. Again, it's his words before. It's the words before the actual book. And the first thing that he says is that the book of Revelation is the revelation of Jesus Christ. Okay? The revelation of Jesus Christ. The word revelation has a lot of baggage to it. That word, as it's tossed around in our culture, can anybody who's familiar with church has heard that word before and has their own understanding of what that is, and certainly has their own understanding of what the book of Revelation is. Oftentimes it's about end times events. It's about when Jesus is coming back. It's mysterious. It's no one really knows. It's difficult to understand. All kinds of opinions. All that's tied into this word revelation. It's really unique when you look at this, the word revelation. The primary translation of it, it's the Greek word apocalypsis. The primary translation of it is unveiling, which is probably has less baggage to it than revelation. It's described in unveiling something that was hidden that is now being seen, and it's oftentimes associated with a divine unveiling. Okay, apocalypsis. Here's what we found unique about this. That's where we get the title to the book of Revelation. So we get the title of this book right there, that first word, apocalypsis, revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ. That is the first time in this word, in this verse, chapter 1, verse 1, the very first word in the book. It's the first time that it's used, and it's the last time that it's used. This word right here, apocalypsis, where we get the title of the book, the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's the first time it's used, and it's the last time it's used. Every time after this verse, every time after this word rather, where you come into contact with a description of the book within its own pages, it's always described as a prophecy. Let me give you an example of this. If you look at verse 3, verse 3 says, "Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy." So the book is described, the very first word in the very first verse of the book is, John calls it a revelation, apocalypsis. That's how he describes it. But that is a description of what the book is, and the book is a prophecy. Every time the book is referred to in its own pages, from the first chapter to the last chapter, it's always referred to as a prophecy. So the book of Revelation is a prophecy, and John describes it as a revelation of Jesus Christ. So revelation is a descriptive term to this prophecy. That was really helpful to me, because first and foremost, what John tells us in the very opening statement of the book is that you want to know what this prophecy is about. It is about the revelation or the unveiling of Jesus Christ. Okay? Revelation or unveiling of Jesus Christ. Which means if you come into the book of Revelation for any other purpose than to seek Him and to have Him revealed and Him unveiled before you, if you come into the book of Revelation for any other purpose, you're missing the point of the book of Revelation. This was really crucial to me on a number of different levels. First of all, we began to deal with the idea of prophecy and what prophecy was all about. And I came in contact with a verse in Revelation chapter 19, and the author makes a bold statement about prophecy. Chapter 19 verse, if you want to look at that, chapter 19 verse 10, toward the end of it, it says, "For the testimony," okay, the testimony or revelation of Jesus Christ, okay, for the testimony of Jesus Christ is the spirit of all prophecy. Okay? For the testimony of Jesus Christ is the spirit of all prophecy. In other words, you want to know what the spirit of prophecy is, it's about the testimony of Jesus Christ. So anytime you encounter prophecy, it's always about Jesus. We dealt a lot with prophecy in entering this book because it is a prophecy. And one of the things I found interesting about prophecy is prophecy never had an emphasis in the Old Testament or the New Testament on times and dates. Prophecy was never given so that the people of Israel or the recipients of the prophecy, you or I, prophecy was never given to find out when something was going to take place. Prophecy was always given as a statement that God was communicating, hey, I am moving and acting and working in your midst, and you can have hope that I have not abandoned you. So it was always on the event of what God was doing. It was always on who He was revealing. And ultimately, prophecy is a testimony of Jesus. Prophecy always points to Him. Prophecy was never given to figure out times and dates. I went back in the Old Testament, kind of testing this hypothesis, and was amazed that you come into these different prophecies about Jesus. One of them had to do with a very well-known prophecy of sending the Messiah, that God said, I'm going to send my Messiah before you. But see, he didn't say, I'm going to send my Messiah before you, and it's going to be, the point of the prophecy was to show that, hey, it was going to be, in about 600 years on a Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. See, that wasn't the point of the prophecy. The point of the prophecy was, hey, I am moving and acting in your midst, and I am sending a Messiah, a Savior, to you. And the prophecy was given not to pinpoint when it was going to happen, but that indeed it was going to happen. So prophecy was never an emphasis. Prophecy was never emphasis on times and dates. Now we stress that because most of the time when people come into the book of Revelation, the emphasis is on when's this going to happen and when is this going to take place and wait, who's the Antichrist and when's he going to appear and see all that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, the book of Revelation deals with times and dates, and there's several times and dates in the book of Revelation. But the emphasis is not about those times and dates or when those times and dates are. The emphasis is on the person of Jesus Christ. A really plain example of this in the New Testament, dealing with prophecy, is in Matthew chapter 24, if you would like to look at that. Jesus is walking through the temple, and The disciples are amazed at the temple and how beautiful it is, and they're drawing, Jesus' attention. They're talking to Jesus, and their attention is really focused on the beauty of the temple. Chapter 24, verse 1. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Jesus said this, "Do you see all these things?" he asked. "I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." Of course, you read on, the disciples are like, "Man, hey, that's pretty interesting. Hey, that's going to take place. That's going to transpire. I mean, hey, these things are going to be thrown down." They're curious about that. Verse 3. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, hear this, "when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the sign of the end of the age?" Hey, when's this going to take place? Hey, what's this going to be? Really important to know. And they're interested in that because it's interesting to me, every time prophecy in the Old Testament and New Testament comes about, there's always controversy that surrounds it. There's always misinterpretation and there's a misunderstanding of the prophecy. I mean, the prophets in the Old were cursed, and the majority of the prophets in the Old Testament, you really didn't even know they were prophets until after they were dead and gone and what they said had come to pass. Then the people of Israel said, "Whoa, hey, that guy was a prophet." It's the same here. There's a misunderstanding of the prophecy that Jesus did. So they asked him, when's this going to happen? And Jesus spins from verse 4 all the way down through the end of the chapter, and then on, he details what takes place in this prophecy. But he comes down to verse 36, and it says, "No one knows about the day or the hour." Hear this. "Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." So Jesus, after detailing and describing a little bit of the prophecy, he says, hey, time and dates you don't need to worry about. I mean, in fact, hey, the angels in heaven don't know, no man knows, not even I, the Son, knows, but only the Father. So he pulls their attention away from times and dates. And again, the point of the prophecy was all about him and all about what God was going to pull off and all about what God was going to bring about through Jesus. That's the point of prophecy. Now, go back to Revelation if you followed with me into Matthew. This is so crucial. This is so crucial because when you come into the book of Revelation, see, what you're encountered with is not times and date stuff. What you're encountered with is the person of Jesus. He says, the very first verse, that the book of Revelation, first thing he says is about the unveiling or the revelation of Jesus Christ. Now, scholars are divided on that first statement. Okay? Scholars are divided on that first statement. Primarily, probably most scholars would agree that the book of Revelation, scholars that is, educated people who approach this, believe that this is not about times and dates, figuring out when stuff that's going to take place. That most agree with that. But what they differ on is what this first statement means. They believe that the book of Revelation is about the unveiling or the revelation of Jesus Christ, but what does that mean? Two different stances on that phrase, the unveiling of Jesus Christ. The first stance that scholars take, and there's primarily only two stances. The first stance that scholars take on the revelation of Jesus Christ, the unveiling of Jesus Christ, is that the book of Revelation is a revelation. It is an unveiling of a divine truth, and that Jesus is the one revealing that truth. First stance. Book of Revelation, what is it? Hey, it's a prophecy. What's the prophecy about? What's the content of the prophecy? It's the revelation or the unveiling of Jesus Christ. And they believe that that means there is this great revelation, there's this great divine truth that's going to be revealed, and Jesus is the one who's revealing that. The revelation of Jesus Christ. First stance. Second stance, the second stance is supported, and they believe it means, the other set of scholars, that the book of Revelation is a divine revelation. It is a divine truth being revealed, but it's not like Jesus is revealing that. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ himself. In other words, Jesus is not revealing a divine truth that's apart from himself. When you come in the book of Revelation, the prophecy, it is an unveiling of Jesus himself. That's the content of the prophecy. And of course, I side with that group. I side with those over here. That the book of Revelation is the unveiling of Jesus himself. Now, quickly, before we have to close this first section, and I want you to dialogue on this, and there's going to be some questions for you to discuss concerning what we've been studying here. There's enormous ramifications. There's enormous practical application in your lives from this. When you come in the book of Revelation, in every setting, what you see is that there is a divine revelation of Jesus going on. He is the one who's revealed. You encounter suffering. You encounter various problems. You encounter all kinds of issues. You encounter all kinds of details that are woven into this hour that John is writing. And it's interesting that Jesus, it's the truth that Jesus is the answer to every issue. Jesus doesn't have the answer. Jesus is the answer. Jesus doesn't give a solution. Jesus is the solution. Jesus doesn't, hey, send a care package to these churches that are going through difficult times, and in that's the stuff they're going to need to get through. No. Jesus himself is the issue. For instance, let me give you a couple examples of this. You leave the prologue into the prophecy, and you come down to chapter 1, verse 9. John is in this dilemma. He is on the island of Patmos. And in fact, he in his opening statement, he talks about suffering and he talks about endurance. And tradition has told us a lot about John and his circumstance and how he was banished there. And he'd been boiled in oil, and there have been all kinds of details and concerning, suffering, hard times. He finds himself here. It says that he's on the island of Patmos, and then the Lord's day comes. Verse 10. On the Lord's day, he says, I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet, which said, and it says, write on a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches, and he lists those 7 churches. John, what he does, is he turns around to see the voice of the one who's speaking to him. In fact, that's what it says in verse 12. I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands, and get this, he doesn't just say it was Jesus. He begins to describe an unveiled Jesus. He begins to describe a revealed Jesus, the content, the insides of who he really is in his person. It's powerful. He turns around and he sees someone, verse 13, like a son of man, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest. And he goes through, in verse 13, 14, and 15, even down through verse 16, and you see as the content and the insides of Jesus is revealed, and there's some really good stuff about who he is that's presented in this passage. First thing is that he has a robe reaching down to his feet with a golden sash around his chest. Scholars tell us that's a picture of the high priest. It's a high priestly garment. Jesus is revealed as the high priest who stands in the sanctuary not built by hands, but by the Father in heaven. Hey, he's the real deal. He's the fulfillment of all the human high priests that we've had here on earth. Revealed who he is. The next statement is, his head and hair were like wool. It's white as snow. Sign of wisdom. Jesus in his personhood is wisdom embodied. Revelation. So the first thing you encounter, Jesus comes to John. And he doesn't say, hey, I have some really good information. I am wisdom. I don't have some good things to tell you. I am wisdom. He comes and he doesn't say, hey, let me give you some direction in terms of, high priestly events and stuff and where to go to get, He is the high priest. And he's the one with the eyes like blazing fire. Verse 15, feet like bronze glowing in a furnace. His voice, the sound of rushing waters. All of that is intimately tied in the personhood of who he is. First example. When you come into chapters 2 and 3, there are 7 churches that he's referring to, all in the province of Asia. And they're listed, starting at chapter 2, verse 1, and extending through the end of chapter 3. Each church has an issue. Okay? Each church has a problem. Each church is facing something. Jesus comes to that church, and this is powerful. I found it really significant that he comes and he addresses each church. Now, each church is different, and each church has a different location, different problem, different issue. But Jesus comes, even though they're all different, he comes and shows that he's the fulfillment to each one of those churches. He comes to the church of Ephesus, and he presents himself differently than he does to the church in Smyrna. To the church of Ephesus, chapter 2, verse 1, he says, these are the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. That's how he presents himself to Ephesus. To the church in Smyrna, he says, verse 8, these are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. So he presents himself differently to Ephesus than he does Smyrna. To Pergamum, he presents himself differently. To the church in Thyatira, did my best. He presents himself differently. To the church in Sardis, differently. Philadelphia, differently. Laodicea, differently. They're all different. He presents himself different. And this is powerful because each church has a different issue. Each church has a different problem. And Jesus comes and says, hey, I am the answer to whatever you're going through. Hey, whatever problem you have, I'm the answer. It's not that I have the answer. It's not that I have a big closet back here full of all the answers, and you have a problem, I'll go back there and I've got access to all that. That's not what Jesus is the answer. See, whatever problem in my life, He is the answer for that. Got a problem in my marriage? He's my answer. Jesus, come down and get in the middle of my marriage. I got a problem with finances. Jesus, come down and stand right in the middle of my finances. I got a problem with temptation in my life. Jesus, come down and control what I was never able to control. Get in the middle of my mindset and my thought process and the way that I see and the way that I... See, Jesus is the answer. I'll give you one example of this, really plain. It's the church of Smyrna. That's the second church beginning at verse 8. You read down through verses 9, well, just 9 and 10, you get the picture of a church that's under massive persecution. Verse 9 says, I know your affliction and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Listen to this, verse 10. Do not be afraid of what you're about to suffer. I tell you the truth, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you. That's going to happen. And you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. Okay, they're under massive persecution, suffering. Hey, the devil says, I'm going to put some of you in prison. Some of you are going to be tested in that manner. Some of you are going to be put to death. Hey, but how is Jesus the answer to that? Listen to how He presents Himself. Verse 8. These are the words of Him who's the first and the last, who died but came to life again. So He's like, hey, been there, done that, bought that t-shirt. Hey, they killed me. The way they treat me, they're going to treat you. But as I overcome, you will overcome. So the answer to persecution in my life is embracing Him. Isn't that phenomenal? See, the answer to every single issue that we can have is Him. First lesson, first study, first initial involvement in these first 3 verses tells us that this book is a prophecy. The emphasis of the prophecy is not on finding out times and dates of when Jesus is going to come back, because no man knows the day or hour. It's a thief in the night type thing. See, and He doesn't give us in content. That's never what prophecy has been about. The nature of prophecy has always been about Him, the person, revealing Him. First statement tells us that the prophecy is about the revelation of Jesus Christ, the unveiling of who He is. Okay? And when you see the unveiling of who Jesus is, you see the answer in the person of Jesus for every issue that you have. I trust you're going to embrace that. I want Him in my life like that.